Going Nowhere. By Ayya Khema, 1923 to 1997. Meditations on the Buddhist Path. About the author. Foreword. Ayya Khema was a very unlikely person. A round little woman with a large, featured face topped with a carpet of close-cropped snow-white hair.
She embodied naturally and oddly all the contradictions of the 20th century. She was an internationally known Buddhist teacher, and also a Jew who fled Nazi Germany. She was a San Diego housewife and grandmother, and also the founder of Dharma centers on several continents. She was a wandering hippie vegetarian mom who had traveled all over the world in her Land Rover. But she was also one of the few fully ordained Western Buddhist nuns and wrote scores of books on Buddhist meditation. Despite all this, in person, she was not awe-inspiring. I think she did not see herself that way, and she did nothing to create an aura around her, although she was never shy about acknowledging her spiritual accomplishments. I always enjoyed her company and felt happy in her presence.
Although she was my mother's age, she reminded me of my grandmother, another small round woman from Europe who had seen the world turn upside down. Maybe it was because of all this contradiction, all this breadth of living, that she seemed immune to the snares of orthodoxy and idealism that religious practitioners so often fall prey to. She had an enormous quality of cutting through flattery, cutting through preconceptions, cutting through confusion, doctrine, desire, verbiage, complications. Maybe it takes a grandmother, a Holocaust survivor, to appreciate what's really important and necessary for our lives, without sidetracks. Theravada Buddhism, with its practical emphasis on happiness, liberation from suffering, and technical path, was Ayya's perfect vehicle. She seemed made for it.
The Western Buddhist movement is already several steps down the road from its naive beginnings, in which alienated Westerners strove mightily to replace their own painful conditioning with an idealized Asian perspective. Along the way, many complications have necessarily been introduced. How could they not be? Along with an ever-increasing body of new translations of and commentaries on traditional teachings, we have also now a considerable body of interpretative and critical material, so that now there is no Western Buddhism without reference to psychology, ecology, feminism, social action, science, critical philosophy, all are postmodern insight and trouble.
While I am sure that all of this is necessary and helpful, it also makes things murky sometimes. Ayya was never murky. She was definite, clear, precise, discriminating, and she had very little patience for anything extra. I think she felt she did not have the time for it. Certainly, she had no interest. Having seen and suffered as much as she had, with such a cheerful and enduring spirit, she just wanted to get on with things. She always cut to the chase, without whining or poetic elaboration. Her teaching was pungent and to the point, as this book attests. Here she takes up the most important basic teachings in a fresh and direct way, without traditional trappings, but with the original spirit intact. What does this actually mean? How can it actually help? In what way can it be put into practice? To protestations of the difficulty and hardship of practice, Ayya always responds, it's simple, it's clear, you can do it. Yes, it takes discipline, yes, you have to be serious, there's no escape from that. But you can do it, and when you do, you will be grateful for it.
I met Ayya late in her life, when she already had cancer and knew her days were numbered. She spoke about this, as about almost anything that would come up in conversation, freely and without mysteriousness. Death would be fine when it came, there was no problem about that. And meanwhile there was much work to be done. Peacefully and without worry. Why Dharma students were so complicated and confused about so many things she simply could not understand. She was patient with it, but I think never stopped marveling at it, uncomprehendingly. The teachings are so clear and straightforward, so easy to put into practice. What is all this fuss about?
Ayya was a person who had, by force of circumstances, always moved on. Because of this, she had had from her earliest years a powerful appreciation of impermanence and non-attachment. She embodied these qualities authentically and spoke of them convincingly. Even after her ordination as a nun and her establishment as a teacher, she continued to be a person on the move, always on to the next event, the next place, the next student, the next teaching, the next moment. That she is gone now is therefore no surprise and no tragedy. She saw leaving simply as the next step in the process. We, who do not yet seem to be gone, are lucky to have her written teachings, which are so useful and so bracing. Through them her voice lives on. Zoketsu Norman Fisher, San Francisco, California.
About the author. Khema was born in Berlin in 1923 to Jewish parents. In 1938 she escaped from Germany and was taken to Glasgow, Scotland. Her parents went to China, where Khema later joined them. With the outbreak of war they were put into a Japanese concentration camp, where her father died. Khema later immigrated to the United States. Between 1960 and 1964 she traveled with her husband and son throughout Asia, where she learned meditation. 10 years later she began to teach meditation in Europe, America, and Australia. She was ordained as a Buddhist nun in Sri Lanka in 1979 by Narada Maha Thera.
In 1978 she established a Theravada forest monastery, near Sydney, Australia, with Frakantipalo. In Sri Lanka she set up the International Buddhist Women's Centre in Colombo and Parapujawan Nuns Island. In 1987 Ayya Khema coordinated the first ever international conference of Buddhist nuns, where H.H. the Dalai Lama was the keynote speaker. In May 1987 she was the first person ever to address the United Nations in New York on the topic of Buddhism. She served as the spiritual director of Buddha House in Germany, which she established in 1989, until her death, and in June 1997 she founded the first Theravada monastery in Germany.
Ayya Khema wrote over 25 books on meditation and the Buddhist teaching. Her work has been translated into more than 7 languages. Her being nobody, going nowhere received the Christmas Humphreys Award. Venerable Ayya Khema died in Germany on November 2, 1997. Also by Ayya Khema from Wisdom Publications. Be an Island. The Buddhist Practice of Inner Peace. Forward by Sandy Boucher. This book offers guidance along the path of Buddhist meditation with direct and practical advice. Ayya Khema's words are clear and straightforward, conveying depth and insight. The Beacon.
Preface. His is a simple book for ordinary people who want to find greater happiness and contentment in their lives by following a spiritual path. The Buddha's path is simple and meant for ordinary people. Anyone with goodwill and determination can follow its steps toward freedom of heart and mind. Both heart and mind have to be involved in this journey toward liberation from the self. The mind understands and concludes, connects and discerns, whereas the heart feels. When our feelings become free of emotional reactions and dwell in love and compassion as their natural abode, our mind will be open to the great truths of universal significance. And the more we refer to these truths, the closer we will get to spiritual emancipation. Hopefully this book can help to point out some steps on the way, according to the Buddha's teaching, and facilitate the journey.
A 10-day meditation course in Kundasale, Sri Lanka, was the venue for the talks that are published here. Although my name appears as the author, this book could never have been assembled without the help and support of many people, each making their own special contribution. The students on the course provided the impetus for the talks, and their questions occasioned many of the points mentioned. Stanley Wijeganawardena was the manager and convener of the course, and without him this book would not have been possible. Barbara Rafe transcribed the tapes and Sister Sangamita typed the first edited version. Sister Vyama proofread the manuscript. Claudia and Amara looked after my physical well-being, and Helga gave me massages and moral support. All the supporters in Sri Lanka, especially Mr. Arthur de Silva, made it possible for me to have the peace and quiet in my hut to attend to this book. How can I show my gratitude? If this book helps even one person to find their path to freedom, the effort will have been amply rewarded. Ayya Khema Parapujawa Nuns Island Dadandua, Sri Lanka.